Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, a marketing exec, chief jargon buster, and I help ground AI in your practical day-to-day.
And I'm Kyle. I live at the intersection of data, product, and strategy, and I do my best to turn the technical AI chaos into something you can actually use.
We go beyond the overhyped headlines and give you the unvarnished truth about AI, what's real, what's hype, and what actually matters for your business.
Every week, we simplify the complex, spotlight the risks, and give you practical tools to make smarter decisions as the landscape rapidly shifts around us.
From agents to commerce to prompt engineering and vibe coding, we deliver honest insights, actionable strategies, and zero gatekeeping.
Let's dive in.
This is Early Adopter. Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. So Jess, how's your week been?
Well, Kyle, you will notice in my background, the background battle has begun again because I finally have my framed Chinatown poster, which has traveled the 6,000 miles to get here. It is an original Chinatown poster from the mid-70s. It's very fragile, so I was really worried about it traveling, but it made it here safely. It survived the framing process because I had it reframed. And it is here.
It's a bit of a dunk, honestly. It's a major flex.
It's such a good poster.
Especially because haven't you identified that it's like completely unique or something?
Oh, no. That's the other one. That's my give and take one. So I also have my poster from 1928, which is, the movie doesn't even exist anymore. The print doesn't exist. It's been lost over time. Yeah. It's from Universal Pictures before Universal Pictures was Universal Pictures. It was their second ever proper movie history. It was Universal's second ever talking picture.
That's pretty cool. All right, so basically what you're saying is you're back in the lead. I've got to step up my game over here.
I mean, we'll let's see what the fans say. Anyway, so I now have that. I now have a sofa bed finally, which was a real mission. At one point, I didn't think,
which is great for me if I come visit.
Exactly. I didn't think it was going to fit into the room because the box wouldn't fit in the room. It's kind of a weird angle to get things into this door. And they just dumped it in the hall. And I was like, shit. Like, I did eventually manage to get out of the box myself. And once it was out of the box, I was able to kind of maneuver it. But I really had this moment. And the box was so wide, I could barely squeeze past it in the hall. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to live with this box in the hall for the rest of my life.
Classic, just don't unpack it ever.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just like
that one box that you have just like never unpacks.
I'd have to climb over it every day to get out the front door. Definitely a fire hazard.
Course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so I was able to extract it. I was able to dismantle the box and get the sofa in. So yeah, so I'm getting there finally. It's taken a couple months, but thank you. I am very excited about this fact.
It's never easy, let's be honest.
Moving, man, it's the
pain. Yeah.
Anyway, how was your week?
Yeah, I mean, just the holidays are upon us.
They are.
So lots of holiday parties. Although I will tell you, my holiday plans are in flux. My poor dad, his retina detached while he was in Florida.
Oh my God, that is such a fear.
And it turns out, after they went through surgery and they pumped like this gas in, so you can't go over a certain altitude, so he can't fly.
Obviously,
he could drive, but you can't go over a certain altitude because of pressure changes.
Oh
and it turns out there's no way to actually get back to the West Coast without going above elevation because of the Rockies and other mountain ranges.
Well, yeah, because when I lived in Colorado for a year, and to get over the Rockies, you have to go across the Continental Divide, and I think it was like 7,000 feet or something. So
yeah. So there's no way for him to get home.
So he's stuck in Florida for how long?
So he's stuck in Florida for like 8-10 weeks or something like that.
Holy shit.
So the fam is trying to figure out separate holiday plans.
Oh my God.
We'll see what happens. But so we feel bad for him, but also, he's stuck out there.
So this week, we are getting into part 2 of our vibe coding series, which I know is one that you have been very excited to finally be doing. In the last episode, we broke down what vibe coding actually is. We talked about that shift from AI helping you create the code to AI helping you build software. It's really changed a lot in the last 12 months. So if you want to learn about how we got to this point with vibe coding, go back and listen to that episode.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, if you're a developer or if you're familiar with, GitHub as a repository, they had a Copilot, which was basically like autocomplete. This isn't an autocomplete on steroids. I mean, this is really like having, I'd say, a junior engineer, maybe even like a senior engineer, but it's really having someone who can take a project and develop whole pieces of work. And we're going to get into a little bit today, like the different types of how vibe coding can be. But I mean, it really can do a lot for you.
So it's all very cool and very exciting. But I think the biggest question that we got after we released that episode is, great, so what tool do I actually use? So that's kind of what we want to get into today.
Yeah, and it's not as simple as this one's the best. And also this changes. I mean,
so quickly.
All of these vibe coding tools are releasing features every week. So the ecosystem is just kind of insane right now. You've got tools for hardcore developers. You've got tools for non-technical founders that help you build prototypes. There's AI agents. There's vibe coding tools that say they're fully autonomous. Everyone's kind of making some pretty wild claims. So I think today we want to kind of really dive into that.
Exactly. So today we'll walk through a lot of the actual tools that are available, what each one is good for, where they fall short, because obviously there's pros and cons to everything, and how you figure out which one makes sense for your specific project.
Yes. And the thing that not enough people talk about or isn't being maybe focused on enough is your setup or basically your project plan as you go into this. I mean, planning before you start a project, as everyone knows, is very important. This is no different. Yeah. So even the best AI tool is going to produce a lot of garbage if you don't structure your project correctly and you don't go in with a really clear objective. And I think that's where a lot of these projects fail.
Okay. So let's talk about the actual tools that people are using when they are vibe coding, because as we said a minute ago, the ecosystem has just gone completely insane in the last year. Tell us about the main categories of tools.
Yeah, I think it breaks down into two main categories. And this is a very simplistic view, and obviously there's a lot of nuance here. But the two categories basically break down into what are called IDE-based tools, so integrated development environments. Those IDEs have been around for a long time, but there's IDE-based tools for developers who want a lot of control and can handle those type of interfaces. And then on the second side, there's full stack, no code platforms for people who want to describe an app, just type in like, hey, do this thing for me. And then it goes and builds it, and you can interact and visualize it as the tool is building it itself.
So actually, if we just think about it between you and I, you would probably go for more of an IDE type tool, whereas I would probably lean more towards a no code tool as someone who knows a bit about coding, but certainly not enough to really go away and do it fully myself. So
well, we're gonna talk about that, because I think again, the great news is that for like super technical people, I think there's a reason to have both. It's not a one size fits all necessarily. Or maybe for non-technical groups, I think there's also a path to get into the more IDE-based tools as well, with some caveats.
So let's start with the IDE tools, because these are really what more technical developers or people working with devs are going to be gravitating towards.
Yeah, the big ones here are Cursor. That's talked about a lot. There's Windsurf, which I think we spoke about quite a while back, because they got into a little bit of it with OpenAI was going to buy them, and then they didn't. And then there's all sorts of drama.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep.
And then obviously there's Replit, which is another big one. So these are all of them. Our VS Code based editors, they kind of built themselves off of that, but they have really deep AI integration. Cursor was one of the first, and it's one of the first that I used because it's really powerful. You can chat with an AI agent about your entire project. It can modify code across multiple files automatically, and it really does kind of that talk to an agent, build a full application, and work through all of the steps to do that. So it is a pretty strong and powerful autonomous code creator.
I'm going to jargon buzzer us here before we get too far into it. I know. So what is VS Code? VS Code is basically a workspace where developers write code. So the best way to think of it is like Microsoft Word, but for code. So all of the tools that we're talking about right now, these IDE tools, are basically built on top of a VS Code type environment.
It's what I use. It's what a
Yeah.
lot of people use.
It's
It's,
I have it on my
you know,
computer right now.
industry standard. Yep.
Yep.
But so building on top of what we're talking about, Cursor lets you have a full conversation with AI about your entire project. So you say, hey, change this pattern everywhere, and it goes through your whole code base and updates it in all the places it needs to. Now, that is more of a recent thing. It didn't start that way. So that definitely, it's come a long way. But that capability is really important because you're not just writing new code, you're refactoring and improving your entire project at scale.
And I understand why that's powerful and why that's a really useful feature, but it's kind of a little bit scary too. Like, you're giving the AI permission to change things across multiple files at once. And I think that's where it's important to flag the potential pitfalls of any of these type of tools. I think this is not just a Cursor thing.
Yeah, it can sometimes get a little overwhelming and you can lose track. We talked about this last week. You have to give up that control and really just focus on the outputs and the objective. And that's why it's still really a developer tool. You have to review everything it does. You can watch the AI work. You can catch mistakes as they go. You can try to build like a process where you're deploying very quickly locally to see like what works and what doesn't. But so you're not completely blind trusting it, but you're also probably not paying attention to every change as it goes through and like really digging into like what's being written as you would writing it yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's important to reiterate with this that it still requires someone technical to review it. Like, I wouldn't be able to catch a lot of these mistakes that it would make. So you really have to review everything it does. So it's just something to remember.
Which a lot of companies, especially software development groups, they're going to have teams or QAs that have code review processes anyway. So it should kind of exist within your existing processes. But I will say now, Windsurf, as opposed to Cursor, approaches this a little differently. So it has a feature called Cascade that shows you a live preview of your app right inside the editor. It also has different like settings, so you can write, debug, deploy, stuff like that. So instead of like write code, save it, deploy it, etc., it actually all happens in one place. So it's a little bit more like one-stop shop than Cursor or some of the other IDE tools might be.
That feels a little bit more like what you would get with something like a website builder thing, where you can make a change and see that change immediately rather than having to go through a process of implementing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for if you're doing a lot of front end work, you can treat it a little bit more like you would if you were designing something in Figma. You're actually producing real code and seeing it happen on the fly, which is also something we're going to talk about when we get to like Lovable and some of these completely no code type tools. You can interact with the visual a little bit more. So you click on an element, you say, hey, change that to whatever color, and you can see the change instantly. So it's a little bit more intuitive. I would say all of these tools are trying to kind of make themselves a little bit unique or different. And so everyone has like these little nuances. Some tools like Windsurf help you or do a little bit more than just the IDE experience.
So which one are you seeing more people lean towards, like if you're a developer?
Yeah, I think it's pretty balanced right now. I think just speaking from my own personal experience, you're probably using quite a few different tools, although I have a clear favorite. But Cursor got to market first and has this reputation. I think has a little bit of the like first mover advantage, so it captured a lot of people. That being said, I'm going to talk about where people are moving, and it's something I moved as well. But Windsurf's interface is probably a little more polished, and I think for a lot of developers, that polish plus the live preview is quite worth it. So I see people moving back and forth between the two, and every time a new feature gets released, you see this like give and take on who's going to do what. But as we're going to talk about, I think my preference, and I think I talked about this last time, is with Claude Code. That's, I think, the most powerful.
That's fair. So let's zoom in on Claude Code.
Yeah, and the big thing is that Claude Code 2.0 is built from the ground up as an agentic coding assistant. So it's not your GitHub Copilot autocomplete. It's also not like technically a VS Code editor with just an agent on top, although you should use Claude Code with VS Code because I think that's a nice tech stack. But under the hood, it's powered by Anthropic's Sonnet 4.5 model. And this is now recent, but the 4.5 model is probably the best. At least it's at the top in terms
Mm.
of like traditional benchmarks, but it's probably at the best in terms of like what it can do for coding. So first and foremost, Claude Code really has like a very strong coding brain. And then when you pair it with other tools, it can be very, very powerful.
And from what I understand, the way that it works with that coding brain is a really interesting part. It's not just spitting out like snippets of code, it actually breaks it down as a goal. So instead of you saying like write this function, it's more like add subscriptions to the app, wire up the billing, and making sure the the tests still pass, and then it figures out what those actual steps are. So it's not just like you ask it one thing and it comes back with a snippet of code. It's much more involved with that.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about this last week, but the ability for these tools to break down your objective into concrete tasks. Again, this kind of goes to the project plan, so you can really help yourself out by having a clear project of what you're trying to achieve. But I would say the determinant of how good your experience is going to be and what the output you get is based on based on the model's ability to break down the tasks into concrete chunks and keep context. We're going to get to this a little bit, but the reason I bring that up is to say that I think Claude Code is the best at that. I think it can take what you're trying to achieve and break it down the best. There's a few other features that I think are really useful. So Claude does integrate with VS Code. So if you're used to that, it's a really seamless experience. But what the biggest thing, the feature that I really like about Claude Code recently that they released is checkpoints. So Claude can take a checkpoint of its edits. And so you kind of get to a point where you finish up a certain task or snippet of the code, you can checkpoint it, and then you can start to build other things. And if the code goes sideways, you can just rewind back and start over. That's super helpful. In the early days with Cursor, I would start something, I would get beyond where I could get back to, and I would end up just scrapping the whole project and starting fresh.
Oh no,
which is not great.
That is not great. No.
So these checkpoints are huge for that.
Yeah, especially from a trust perspective. Like I think one of the scary things about letting an AI loose on your code base is really just what happens if it fucks it all up. So being able to roll it back to a clean checkpoint feels much more like a version control. So like when you have a Word doc or a Google doc and you need to go back and see a previous version, that's the best way to think of it. It's very similar to that. And that is a real safety net. Like if you accidentally mess something up.
Yeah, you're right. It's a game changer from the trust perspective,
Yeah.
It also enables you to experiment and really kind of try new things and not be so concerned about what's going to happen, You can let the agent go off and be a little bit more ambitious and still know that you can reverse what you're trying to do. We're getting further and further up the ladder of autonomy in terms of what you can do for these vibe coding tools. And if you want to go even a little deeper on this, there's an agent SDK, there's MCP integrations, integrating Claude Code or VS Code with different other MCP tools. Wiring Claude Code into your tools and your data systems using MCP can really evolve your vibe coding agent into something that's not just editing files, but can actually like talk to your databases. It can really start to get very powerful and have a lot of context.
I think this is where it starts to move from like fun little experimentation into an actual serious tool that a lot of people are going to be using. Because I think what a lot of people, non-developers, don't realize, and this is kind of, I think, a running joke, is that developers can't remember every single language. So a lot of people would just Google something and see what the answer was on Stack Overflow if they needed. If they couldn't remember how to do something.
That's how I learned how to code.
Exactly. So a lot of people, like when you were a developer, a lot of it is just Googling, how do I do something? So this is kind of like the more streamlined version of Stack Overflow.
Oh man, I remember when I was trying to work with the Facebook APIs way back in the day.
God, those were awful.
Lived on Stack Overflow because that was the worst API documentation. Didn't make any sense. I don't want to harp on that too much, but yeah.
Pretty meta.
And I think going back to our two categories, this is the big difference between the IDE-based tools and the no-code platforms. When you start adding all these integrations, you can literally have a process where you can, with Claude Code, say what you want to achieve, talk about a whole feature. It can script it out. You can build it, review it, using MCP tools, and then you can deploy it, push it to GitHub, pull it onto your server, all from within the same little interface on your little IDE. That's, I think, far more advanced than people think vibe coding is, but it's really evolved pretty quickly. Sorry, I'm just kind of...
So that's the category of tools that you should look at if you are looking for a more serious tool or if you have more of a developer background. For a non-technical founder who wants to build something without looking at any code at all, where do they go?
Yeah, this is the other end of the spectrum. This is on the no code side. I think probably the most popular platform that everyone's heard is Lovable, which is it's great. I can't recommend it enough. There's also another one called Bolt. Both of these are designed for people with zero coding experience, but I actually think regardless of how technical you are, there's a benefit to using it as well. And we'll kind of talk about that. Lovable is entirely browser-based, so you can access it through, Chrome, Firefox, all that good stuff. It's for people who don't want to touch code at all, but really what you end up doing is you describe what you want. So let's say I want an app that tracks my habits, or I want to build like a HubSpot replacement or something for my own customer relationship management. And the platform generates the whole thing, and then you can customize it within their constraints. But again, you can customize it in a way where you can see what it looks like and make changes directly to it.
This is something that I wanted to play with over the Christmas period when it's a little bit quieter, because there's an email tool that I've been wanting to build for ages, or like a calendar app thing. And so I want to kind of get stuck in and work on that.
Yeah. And, that's kind of the promise is that, I mean, Jess, you have programming experience, but if you didn't, or if someone, for anyone listening who doesn't have any coding experience, the promise is that you can build a functional web app without any coding experience. And for the most part, it delivers. Again, there's some caveats to that, but one thing that I think is really interesting, and we talked about it last week, is how Lovable CEO said many of their power users are like product managers, designers, marketers, not engineers. This is really unlocking creative people and people who haven't been able to take, that's the stack of ideas that they have in the drawer and actually like produce some output with it.
One of the other things that I really like about Lovable specifically is their integrations. And their integrations are slightly different, I think, than the Claude integrations. But what I really like about it is that you don't need to know how to connect a front end to a back end, because their integrations kind of do it for you. And if you remember, jargon buzzering myself here, if you remember that, if you think of an app like a restaurant, the front end is where you order in the menu and you sit at the table and everything, and the back end is the kitchen where they make everything. So the back end is where the database is, the front end is your user experience. So Lovable just makes connecting that front end and back end really easy, and it's not easy. And in the past,
they make it a push of a button, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in the past, you would have needed a front end dev and a back end dev, or a full stack dev, someone who's got experience in everything, and maybe a DevOps person. And like it was a real thing. And now anyone can do it.
It's wild, honestly, how streamlined they've made this. I mean, I used to just pound my head against a wall on DevOps type tasks, getting AWS set up or something like that. And Lovable just makes it so easy. There's a tool called Supabase, which can host a database for you. You can point Lovable at Supabase for your backend, like you said, your kitchen, right? And all of your authorizations. You can plug Lovable into a tool called Vercel, which is basically for hosting. So you can actually like put it up on the web without really understanding any of the connections or what that does. And suddenly you've gone from, I just asked a question, I wanted to build a CRM. And because of these two integrations, you've got a full actually production application that could run without ever having to worry about any of the usual DevOps pain. That's pretty wild, actually, like from where we've come a few years ago.
Oh, yeah, because DevOps was like a whole specialized career path. Now, DevOps are still necessary because you still need to double check all of these things. You still need someone with experience. Yeah. But the fact that you can at least get something off the ground without needing that DevOps person is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have fought with a lot of DevOps people over my career. Apologies to all of you. But I will say the evolution of this doesn't take away that skill set,
Yeah.
but it does streamline the ability to prototype and do things really quickly. And so let me get into that, where I think the use case around Lovable and these no code tools is you can really prototype something quickly and also prototype in a way where it's actually kind of functional and so you can see what's happening. So quick little caveat, if you're a developer, Lovable is great for prototyping and showing people what you want it, like what you want an initial application to do. You're probably still going to need to then go use Claude Code and these other tools to bring it to production or to like really link it up and do something more sophisticated. But it's so great for taking like an idea and getting it up onto a page really, really quickly.
Well, and I think it also can be really good if you just need a little internal thing. Like the thing that I want to build is just a place where Natalie and I can both feed our calendars into, and I can easily, because we have calendars across Microsoft and Google, and we've tried, other tools that currently exist and they just don't quite do what we want them to do. So
Yep.
it would just be something that we need to use. It doesn't need to be anything super fancy, but it would just be so useful to have. And so for something like that as well, like you prototyping, obviously, but if you just want a little internal tool or something that you can use yourself, oh my God, game changer.
It with these integrations, you can make it basically live. So that's great.
Exactly.
But, one of the, like I said, the big use case I've been using it for is, especially if you're working with designers, it can sometimes be difficult or a little painful if you're like, oh, I want this thing, right? And I want it to look like this and do this thing. Use Lovable to prototype that and actually bring it to the page and then hand it over to someone and say, hey, look, this is what I was thinking. Now, can you actually design this in Figma properly and like actually handle the proper UI UX? Then they'll go ahead and they'll do that. And then again, as we were talking about, there's that Figma integration where now I could pull
We should
all of
just
those
explain
components.
what Figma is quickly, because we've talked about it a couple of times. Figma is a design tool, like a very good design tool.
It's one of the most popular. It's where a lot of your product designers and UX people are gonna live. The great news is that you can have a process where I can prototype something, hand it to the designer who actually builds it properly in Figma, and then I can take that through the VS Code integration and then start to vibe code off of that using everything they've designed, the components, the styling, etc. You can do some pretty amazing things nowadays very quickly, very easily without a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for someone starting out with vibe coding, what tool would you actually recommend? Because I think there's a pretty big difference between the I want to quickly prototype something and I want to build a real.
Absolutely. It's a great distinction. So I think if you're prototyping and you're not a developer, so Jess, your use case where you want to just like build this to do something specific for you, like we talked about, start with the no code platform like Lovable. I personally like Lovable. I haven't really used some of the other no code tools. These are fast, they're forgiving, you can see results immediately. You can then make changes and iterate through through the platform itself. So they're really useful. If you're a developer or you want to take that prototype and start to build something, let's say production grade, although that comes with some caveats, right? But let's say you want to start getting towards something that's quite sophisticated, go with Cursor, or I would say if you can get it set up, go with Claude Code inside VS Code. I think that's really powerful stack. It has the best balance of power and usability. And I think, especially if you go with the Claude Code route with the Sonnet 4.5, it is by far the best coding tool out there right now.
Well, actually, I think that brings up a good question. Does it matter which LLM is backing these tools? Like, does it matter if you're using Claude Code versus GPT-5 or Gemini?
That's a really good question. And I think it probably matters less than you'd think. I think what matters more is the integrations, how well you've orchestrated the tools to work with your code base. Now, that comes with some caveats. I think the reason that Claude Code is so good is because it has such a massive context window. So it is able to keep your code base in context the whole time. So as long as the model that you're using, the underlying model, has a really big context window and you do feed it the code base and it can keep all of that together, I think all of them are going to be pretty good. Like I talked about, Claude tends to be better at reasoning through the complex problems and breaking down the individual steps, which I think does help with kind of your overall output. But GPT-4 is probably a little bit faster and still does a pretty good job. Gemini with its 3.0, though, is really good. I think they're probably catching up to where Claude Code is, but they're still maybe not quite as good. But they really made a pretty large advancement. So if you're choosing between the tools, the model probably does matter, but I think the tooling that you're using probably matters a lot more to actually address like your level of technical expertise, your processes, and what you want to do with it in terms of integrations to other platforms, if it's a Supabase or, MCP or stuff like that.
So basically, you're saying you can have a mediocre tool with Claude and still feel a little underwhelmed, even though Claude is the gold
hmm
standard, or you could have a great tool with GPT that you're totally fine with.
Yeah, I think the tool that you're using, the tool design, is as
Okay.
important as the model that's powering it. So that's why a lot of people choose Cursor. But I really think it matters more on what tool you're using that makes sense for you rather than the model you're using, because they're all very good and it changes a lot. I really do feel like the world is moving towards this multimodal, benefiting from which one is leading the charge at any given time.
So I think the key takeaway is that it's less about finding the best tool because the best tool doesn't really exist in this circumstance. It's more about matching the tool to your workflow and your level of technical comfort because that's a really big part of it as well.
Absolutely. And I think hopefully we haven't scared you off too much. The truth is that the barrier to entry is quite low right now,
Mm.
and you can get this up and running very quickly. There's a lot of nuance there, but you can really experiment without a huge commitment. And the tools are evolving so fast that whatever you pick right now might be very different in 6 months. And there's not a ton of like switching costs. So try something out and you can always change and, switch over to something else in a few months' time.
So now that we've kind of covered what the basic tools are, let's talk a little bit about best practice because I think that's actually the key way in which you're going to succeed with this.
Absolutely. Best tool, best model
Yep.
actually won't produce as good of an output if you don't have like a clear
Right.
setup. I think the biggest mistake people make is expecting the AI to just magically know what they want. Giving any of these tools one line of what you want means you could get a million different types of outcomes. So what you need to do is you need to start with a plan. Even if it's just a simple, I'll say Markdown file. And we kind of touched about this last time. It's just like a text file, but it's how these tools typically read things. But even if you just start with a simple Markdown file outlining the features and the objective and the structure of what you want to build, that is going to level up your output more than any tool, any model, anything else that you can do.
Piece by piece. I think that's the biggest thing is that as with anything AI, you have to give it those guidelines and give it
hmm
boundaries so that it knows how to operate.
That's the discipline, but very difficult part, right?
Yeah.
If I, and look, we all do it, right? But I've noticed that when I'm lazy with the planning part, the output gets messy and I have to remind myself, wait, go back. Let's go through the planning. If I spend 15 minutes thinking through what I actually want, the AI delivers better. And that just compounds. If I spent a whole day planning this out, that's how I'm going to get the best outcome. It's also important to break your work into small chunks. So rather than having the AI go completely off and building everything, you want to really try to define each feature and each module of what you're trying to achieve. And so the AI can go accomplish that specifically. You don't want to ask the AI to build an entire feature or an entire app in one shot if it's complicated. If it's simple, again, it depends on what you're trying to do. But, a good example of this would be build the login page, test it, then build the authentication, test that, then connect them together, then go build each piece incrementally. That's one, how you're going to make sure that each part works really well, but also it's useful for the AI to break it up and do one thing well at a time.
Also, as we just said, the AI does better on contained tasks when you give it those guidelines,
hmm
but also small iterations mean that you can catch problems much earlier and it's much easier to catch them because if you're asking it to build absolutely everything at once, you're going to have to go
Yeah.
through absolutely everything. Whereas if you're building it in like little
Hmm.
modules, then you can check that module, then check the next module, and so on.
Spot on. And especially as we talked about with those checkpoints that you have,
Mhm.
get something working, your app is deployed, it's good. You have your checkpoint. You try to build the next thing, it breaks. You can go back to your checkpoint so you don't have to scrap the whole thing.
Which is
So
the
that's super
absolute,
helpful.
I was going to say, the key part of having those checkpoints to begin with.
Yeah. And make sure to leverage what AI is good at and cover its blind spots. It's really good at standard patterns because that's what it's been trained on. That's what it knows, but can hallucinate APIs. It definitely oversimplifies security or doesn't have any of it at all. It can miss edge cases. You want to be careful and make sure that you're not going to get like SQL injections, which is just a jargon to say like someone can hack your code and like try to delete your whole database, which you obviously don't want.
Obviously,
So
don't want that.
you do need to kind of leverage what AI is good at and what it's not good at. This kind of gets into a little bit of the technical bit, but there's a great research paper called Good Vibrations. But this study really found something super interesting in terms of how real developers vibe code. And I think it's really useful as we talk about best practices. But people switch between three mental modes when they're coding. So there's the co-creation, which is working side by side with the AI. This is when I'm having that conversation with it to try to get what I want it to do. There's delegation, where you give it really big tasks and it kind of runs autonomously on its own. And then there's a third kind of mental mode, which is verification, where I'm reviewing the AI's work and I'm doing a lot of like the quality control, just like a senior engineer would review code as well.
Yeah. And in this study, the developers also said that the magic is staying in that flow state. I think we all know what that flow state can be like, where you're just like in that mindset and you're just working. So when that back and forth feels really smooth and creative, but they also said that the trust grows pretty slowly, understandable. You don't want to put all your trust in the AI immediately, but as the AI starts to produce good outputs, you can start to delegate more because you trust it more. So it's like that building of trust.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting framework for thinking about how to like use AI or how to like basically work with the AI vibe coding tools. It's about learning when to co-create, when to delegate, and then when to verify. And so if you think about it in that sense, it can kind of help you elevate your interaction with these tools. You still need to review the important stuff, especially anything customer facing or security critical. And as we always say, think of it like a really fast junior developer who needs code review on important features.
Yeah. And something else to remember is that you should always keep your context organized. So these modern models that we've been talking about, they hold your entire code base. That's one of the really big developments that we've seen in the last 12 months, but you still need to help them stay organized. So that means updated documentation, maintain running notes about the architecture of it, clear naming conventions. So that's making sure that that everything is named the same and you don't have a period there and a space there. And that will confuse the AI.
Yeah. And I think architect is a really good word. Consider yourself the architect of this platform. You're maybe not doing all the developer, the coding. You've now delegated that off. But you do need to be kind of that senior developer or senior architect that is overseeing everything that's doing. The grunt work is automated, but you're making a lot of the strategic decisions about the structure, how the pieces fit together, and what you're overall trying to achieve. So as you're going through and as you're continuing to develop more features and expand on the app, keep that architect idea in mind, because you continually need to update your documentation. You continually need to be overseeing what's being built.
So before we go any further into vibe coding, we need to talk about the landmines, because yes, vibe coding is amazing as we keep talking about it, but there are some extremely predictable ways to go terribly, terribly wrong. So we should talk about those. And so before we get into the pitfalls, we just want to quickly remind everyone, because we're going to be talking a lot about Markdown files. We just want to remind everyone what a Markdown file is. So Kyle, do you want to tell us what it is?
Yeah, a Markdown file, it's basically just a text file, but it has a specific syntax structure. So just like .doc or .ppt for your PowerPoints, this is just a .md. So, but why it's really useful is this is how these coding tools, and just generally how when you have been coding, you use these Markdown files as part of your project structure. Everyone's probably familiar with a README file. That is a type of Markdown file that's been around forever. But as we talked about earlier, vibe coding tools really need these Markdown files to plan out and to like structure your project accordingly.
Great. So now that we have clarified that, let's get into these pitfalls.
Yes. So the first and biggest pitfall is not being clear about what you want. So the AI just invents the app for you or kind of goes off on its own.
Mhm.
It will make 1,000 assumptions about architecture, naming, data, processes, and flows. And probably most of them will be wrong. So if you start out at this really vague prompt, it's going to be hard to bring it back to what you actually want.
If you just think about how you interact with ChatGPT on a daily basis, your output is only as clear as your idea. So if your
Mhm.
idea is vague, then your app is going to be vague, or it's not going to be what you want. And you have to go back and
Mhm.
do a lot more work to get it into a state that you want. So just everything that we've been talking about in terms of structure, it all just comes back to
Mhm.
being really clear and giving it that structure that it needs.
So Markdown files super important, but this is why you need to start with like a project overview Markdown file. Define what the app does and equally important what it does not do. If you start with that, that's going to solve this kind of vague prompt that you might have.
As we say, you got to give it the guardrails so it
Hmm.
knows what it can and can't do.
Absolutely.
Pitfall number 2 is schema drift. So
Mhm.
picture this, you've got your vibe code project working nicely, everything's, doing its thing, and then you ask the AI to do something that sounds really simple, like add a payment field or track user preferences, and then all of a sudden everything stops working.
Yeah, and the reason for this is pretty straightforward. The AI changed how your data was organized, or it updated a couple files with different paths that weren't correct, but you didn't really see that it was doing it, and all of a sudden you're going to get a big error.
So I think this is the a really key thing that non-technical people need to understand. When you build an application, there's like a hidden blueprint underneath everything that
Hmm.
says, here's how we organize information in this app. And this is called a schema. So if you think of it like the skeleton of an application, everything is built on top of this skeleton or this blueprint. So if you just think of like
Hmm.
an architecture blueprint, we all know what those look like. That's what a schema is for data.
Hmm.
So everything, every button, every form, every calculation is built off the back of this schema.
Completely. Sometimes you're going to ask the AI or the tool to add a feature, and it's going to go off and say, okay, well, in order to do this better, I should reorganize how we store data, whether it's in the database or it's locally. But once it does that, if it adds new tables or renames fields or changes the structure without asking permission, it could potentially break something.
Exactly. So to prevent this, you need to lock it down. So you create a document, another Markdown
Hmm.
file called data model or something along those lines. And it basically just says, this is our structure. You cannot change it. And again,
Hmm.
giving it that guardrails. So that way, every time you ask the AI to do something, you can point it back at that
Hmm.
schema and you can tell it explicitly, do not touch this.
Yeah, and there's workarounds for this, but that's probably the best way to make sure that the AI isn't changing your database structure without you knowing.
So the next pitfall is no shared architecture. So that essentially means you start with a clean project, everything is organized, and then you've been working on it for a couple of months, and all of a sudden you've got components living in multiple different folders with different naming conventions. And then once that stuff ends up scattered across multiple different folders or the naming is confusing, things start to break because everything needs to be very organized with these sorts of applications. If you reference something wrong, then, an
Mhm.
import's going to fail and then the whole thing falls down.
Yeah, and the reason this happens is, if you don't explicitly tell the AI how to organize your code, it's again just going to improvise based on what it thinks is best. So one request, it puts stuff in, a specific folder. The next request, after you come back to it, especially if you don't give it that context, it's going to put it in a completely different folder. So if you start having this expand, you can imagine over enough time, it can get pretty messy and difficult to then trace back.
Yeah, and it's not that the AI is doing anything wrong. It's just not following a plan because there was no plan to follow. And then
Mhm.
every improvisation adds a new layer of confusion. And then all of a sudden you've got like spaghetti code where everything is scattered across everything. It's just like
Yeah.
when you're trying to find a file in your Google Drive or something and it's not organized in the folder that you thought it was going to be in, then you have to go on a mission to try and find it. And that's essentially what the AI is trying to do. And it gets confused and it breaks things.
This happened to me a lot early on especially when I was using Cursor, when the context windows for these models was a lot smaller. You would basically have it start reproducing or duplicating in different structures. So you'd have multiple components, libraries, multiple utilities, folders. You just started duplicating a lot of the stuff because it didn't know that you had already created it. So to prevent this kind of spaghetti code or duplication problem, you can create an architecture markdown file. This is, again, creating a blueprint for how your code should be organized. So what goes in all of those folders I mentioned, like your components and utilities, naming rules, folder structures. So then every time you ask the AI to build something, it's pointing back to its designed architecture, and it's going to then build stuff within your existing architecture, which is really important.
It's the same idea. Like a lot of this is repetitive, but it is quite important because it's the same idea across the board. You're giving the AI a set of rules that stay consistent through the project so it can always refer back to those. Pitfall number 4, inconsistent UI patterns. So user interface, user experience patterns. This one is a real pet peeve of mine. That could be, your button is a different color or a slightly different shape, or, your fonts are different, or whatever it is. It drives me insane.
Yeah. And I think, what happens is that the AI doesn't have a unified visual language. And if you're coming to it after time and it doesn't have some of that context, it's not going to know to reference or think about things in the same structure. So it's just going to invent a new kind of language or version for each component. So like you said, 3 different button styles, random spacing, colors don't match because it's just building that new feature from scratch based on the very simple prompt you gave it. Every section is going to be designed by a different person because effectively the AI is coming at it completely fresh each time you want to start something new.
And it just looks like absolute shit. And it's not a good user experience, right? We've all
100%.
seen it. It's going to look like a GeoCities website from 1995.
Great reference. Great reference.
We all remember what those look like, right? Bit of neon green. So without those explicit rules saying, okay, these are the colors that you have to use, these are the fonts, like, there's a reason why we have branding and you have to maintain consistency in your branding. So you need to make sure that the AI knows what your branding is.
And sometimes it can get really nuanced, but even just little differences in user experience can be off-putting. So you want to kind of prevent that. So the best way to do that is you need to set up your UI guide from the start. So create a UI guide markdown. It basically is your design rules for your entire application. Put all of your specifications, the spacing, the color palette, the design, the button components, and how you want buttons designed. I mean, it sounds silly, but it's actually really important when you're building. All of these design decisions can live in one place so that every time you build something new, the AI is referencing what's in that UI guide. And so it can basically say like, hey, here's the new feature I want, but use my styling so everything looks consistent.
Yeah, because otherwise you do really run the risk of it looking like it was designed by 6 different people, and no one wants that. Okay, final pitfall, and I think this is one that most people don't actually realize it's a problem until it is a problem, and that is switching your tools mid-build.
Yeah, it feels harmless, and I realize I probably implied earlier that you could do it within mid-project, but that's probably a bit of a mistake, If you think to yourself, I'm going to try Windsurf today instead of Cursor, and you switch to a different AI tool mid-project, you're probably like, what's the harm? But, every tool kind of writes code differently and has different prompts that it puts as it builds, different conventions, different styles, different approaches to solving problems.
So then you end up with multiple different AIs basically collaborating with each other. So it just becomes really messy because there's no consistency in what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And you end up feeling it in the code base. It just gets really inconsistent. So it's difficult for your review work. But the fix is pretty straightforward, right? Pick one tool per build phase and stick with it. If you need to switch tools, you could declare a new phase and reestablish, rules around like your architecture or your project overview, stuff like that. But the easy way is just find the tool you like and stick with it.
Yeah. So a lot of these pitfalls have similar solves, but the theme that we need to keep coming back to is constraints. So you give it those guidelines, you give it those boundaries, and consistency. Those are really just the key things to help you avoid some of the major issues when you're vibe coding. So to wrap up our episodes on vibe coding, there's a lot of different tools out there. So really, it's all about just experimenting, seeing which ones you like. Everyone's going to work in a slightly different way. So certain tools might work for you, others don't. But make sure to pick it on based on your skills level. So if you're not technical, maybe avoid the Claude Code or the IDE-based tools. But again, as we keep reiterating, everything comes down to structure.
I mean, spot on. Is like the way to really elevate your vibe coding game for sure.
Let's shift gears into our AI news of the week. So our first story this week is actually a pretty significant one, and it ties directly into what we've been watching when it comes to the competitive AI landscape, because as we know, this stuff all changes, on a weekly basis. OpenAI just declared what they're calling a code red internally. Sam Altman, the CEO, put out a memo to staff basically saying, we need to drop everything and focus on making ChatGPT better, faster, and more reliable. So they're pausing some of the key features that they've been working on, which is really interesting. Things like shopping features, just to focus on the core product.
What's really interesting about that, I think, is why they're doing it, So it's not just an internal concern. It's because Google is catching up and they have caught up so quickly. I mean, I don't remember. I think it was maybe like a year ago. We were cutting like, oh, Google is dead, right?
100%.
Like, oh, they've missed the boat.
At the start of this year, Google's AI was a little bit of a joke.
Right. And wow, I mean, how things have changed, right?
Yeah.
Like Gemini 3.0, their latest model, is really blowing past competitors on benchmarks. A lot of people are switching from ChatGPT over to Gemini. And plus, they've had really big wins with tools like the Nano Banana image model. I mean, people are really hyping that up. Google declared their own code red after ChatGPT landed, and they have responded incredibly well.
So from a business perspective, I think what we're watching here is a pretty classic competitive inflection point. OpenAI obviously had this massive first mover advantage. They really owned the space. You talk about just asking chat something now, just like we used to ask Google. So everyone was comparing themselves to ChatGPT. But now I think the developments that Google have had, plus the name and recognition and the trust that Google has built up over 20 years, for a lot of people, that's a really important thing. So if you're running a business or you're a founder deciding on what tools to use right now, it's not necessarily just ChatGPT or nothing anymore. I think there's now some alternatives, especially if you already use Google Workspace for your emails or, whatever.
And OpenAI really did have that first mover advantage. And that is huge when it talks about technology adoption. They had the brand recognition. They became synonymous, right? But Google is now competing. And let's not forget, I mean, they are a giant company with a lot of money to spend. So I think OpenAI is probably going to be panicking a little bit. I mean, obviously that red code shows a little bit of, Sam Altman hitting the panic button. So they need to stay on top. And now you're seeing, okay, what are they going to do in order to do that?
Yeah, because they also have recently announced that OpenAI needs to raise $207 billion by 2030 to fund these massive data centers that they're trying to build. So if they're starting to look less dominant, that becomes a lot more difficult to raise that insane amount of money. Plus, they had that huge lawsuit that we talked about last week that could potentially put them on the hook for hundreds of billions. So it's no surprise that they call the code red, because suddenly they're looking a little shaky.
Yeah, but I'm worried about what that actually means going forward and what decisions they make. I mean, pausing some of those shopping features, it actually kind of feels like the wrong move, So it's like when these companies panic, and they put these code reds out, they're going to move fast, but in what direction are they moving quickly? Sometimes that doesn't really end well. That sometimes means you're cutting corners and you're shipping things that aren't ready, or you're maybe taking your eye off of some of those long-term strategic decisions that can really help move the industry forward. And so, either that means making mistakes or it's just not going to end well. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. And, let's also bear in mind that Google's competition isn't 100% there yet. Gemini 3 is a lot better than
Hmm.
previous models, but it's not like people are fleeing ChatGPT en masse. That first mover advantage,
Hmm.
has really given them a solid place to start from. But I think OpenAI's response is, I would be concerned if I were there, because if Google actually really nails it, then
Yeah.
it could be game over.
I will say one thing. I think, though, this is great for all of us.
Yes.
Having these players be more competitive and constantly pushing the envelope on what these models can achieve and do is going to have great
Yeah,
downstream effects for all of us.
absolutely. Okay. So in our AI gone wrong this week, Amazon has released AI dubbed versions of popular anime on Prime Video. So shows like Banana Fish and No Game, No Life. The dubs, however, are absolutely terrible, and the fans are not happy. Just all around really shitty. They're robotic, they're generic, they have no emotion.
Yeah, and the thing is, some of these are beloved,
Yeah.
anime libraries. So Banana Fish is a really big deal. Fans have been waiting for decades for an English dub. The manga ended in 1994. The anime aired in 2018, so 7 years ago. So people have been begging for this for a long
Mhm.
time, but when they finally got it, it did not live up to expectations. It was not good enough.
But also, like, the AI gone wrong aspect of this isn't just that the dubs are bad, because obviously they are. It's how Amazon
Mhm.
handled it. Like, they rolled it out over the holiday weekend with no announcement. They didn't do any press release. They didn't do any, they didn't talk about the fact that they were experimenting with it. They just released it. So the fans are going to be really excited about the fact that this has been released, and this is the result that they get.
Yeah, it's a curious move. It almost feels like Amazon knew it would piss people off,
Oh,
which is
of
why they
course
buried
they
it.
did. Yeah, of course. But the funniest bit is that the Spanish dubs are still up. The English ones came down after the backlash, but the Spanish ones that were dubbed by AI are still there. So either Amazon thinks that Spanish language audiences aren't going to complain as loudly, or they could actually be running A/B tests to see which market would accept it faster, because I wouldn't put it past Amazon to do that.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's kind of interesting to see how all of these big players are like testing in production or like testing against real live users all the time. We've seen OpenAI do this quite a bit as well with like its
Mm.
agent SDK and all that stuff. Crunchyroll is also dabbling into this, which is a super popular
Yeah.
anime site. They had AI generated subtitles that were so bad. Someone found that literally said "Chat GPT said" in the middle of a scene. So people are testing. They have a ways to go, I think.
Yeah. Obviously, the job loss is part of it. Like,
Hmm.
obviously, the voiceover actors are concerned about their livelihood, but also anytime a company does something like this, where they ship something that's really cheap and low effort, it tanks public trust in AI, and that is going to be a really key problem. They're very short-sighted with some of this. They're not thinking about the longer term effects
Hmm.
of what this is going to do.
Yeah, I think we talk about this public trust in AI is
Hmm.
pretty fragile right now.
Yeah.
So as people are still figuring out what this technology is actually good for and what it's not, it's great for the tech players figuring this out, but it's not good for the consumer and the overall view of what AI can and can't do.
So that ends our episode on vibe coding. Kyle, are you happy with it all? I know this was one that you were so excited about.
I could talk about this forever, but the good news is we can probably revisit this in a few months' time
Oh,
because it's going to change so
it's
much as well.
absolutely going to change. So if you want to dig any deeper into any of this, we'll put all the tools in the show notes, because I know we've thrown a lot
Mhm.
of information at people and it's hard to keep track of it all. But also, if you are building with vibe coding, we definitely want to hear about it.
Yeah, and look, if I'll kind of throw this out there. If anyone's interested in talking specifically about their
Mm,
challenges and their tech stack, Jess and I are happy to kind of get into that in a little bit more detail. I can
yeah.
geek out about this stuff for a long time, and plus we know a lot of people who are doing this, so we've
Yes,
got some
that's
great
true.
great examples of what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, so make sure to drop us a line at hello@earlyadopter.ai. Remember, there's no E in adopter.
Hmm. And don't forget, we are on YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn,
Instagram
at
and Instagram.
Instagram. That's right. The tag is at early_adopter. And remember, there's no E in the adopter.
That's right. So I look forward to seeing you all again next week. See you later,
See you,
Kyle.
Jess.
Bye.
Bye.